Now, it is my pleasure to announce our main guest speaker. He is a person who has had a huge influence in my career personally and in my work as a language and bilingual educator, as I'm sure for many of you here today. Dr. Stephen Krashen is an emeritus professor of education at the University of Southern California and an internationally recognized linguist and researcher. He is best known for his work in establishing the 5 hypothesis theory of language acquisition, including the natural approach, the 5 stages of second language acquisition, and the theory of comprehensible input. He's the architect of sheltered subject matter teaching and the author of numerous books, which I'm sure most of you have and have cited many times. And most importantly, according to Dr. Krashen, he was the 1977 inclined bench press champion of Venice Beach, California, 181-pound class, and until recently trained at Gold's Gym in Venice, California. It's my pleasure, and with no further ado, welcome and thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Stephen Krashen and Dr. Ashtari.
Okay, very nice to be here. At my age, it's very nice to be anywhere, as a matter of fact. I want to talk about what happened at Venice Beach, because that's the most important part of the introduction. Yes, it's true. I did train on Venice Beach for years and years. Some of you have been there on the boardwalk. You go down, and that's when people are pumping iron. It's the child of Muscle Beach, which started before that. And I want to tell you a story that illustrates what's going on with bilingual education, what we've learned about it. And I managed to incorporate some star power and my weightlifting background. What happened to me on Venice Beach started relevant to tonight, started around 1971, 1972. We were all down there pumping iron and getting big and strong and trying to look good. And who shows up? Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold Schwarzenegger was already Mr. Universe, I think twice when he came to California. He was still in his early 20s, and he came down to Venice Beach and started training with us. Can you imagine that? I'll tell you the good things about Arnold before I criticize his view of bilingual education. Good things about Arnold, plenty to talk about. Arnold was a PhD in weightlifting, let me tell you. You'd be doing your exercises, you know, doing your bench presses, I'm sure you all do. And when you do bench press, you want someone to help you and spot you so you don't drop the weight on your throat. Arnold would come up, and this is the best known bodybuilder in the world. And he would say, "Oh, can I help you?" And he would spot you. And he'd make some very friendly suggestions like, "You're doing the curls, try it like this. Put your mind in the muscle," just about a minute or two. Now, it was the same group of people I used to train with for years and years. We all knew each other very well. So whenever Arnold came up to any of us and gave us some friendly advice, we passed it around. So we got our own advanced training in bodybuilding from the times when Arnold showed up. An amazingly nice fellow, no question, friendly, pleasant, helpful all the time. Now let me tell you about Arnold as governor. Mostly as governor of California, I don't have too many complaints. As some of you may know, he was very good on the environment, a lot of good things. But he had a misunderstanding of bilingual education. As a successful second language acquirer, he felt he knew how to do it, and he gave people advice, all of which was wrong. He would say things like, you don't want to be speaking Spanish all the time. You want to practice your English. You don't want to be watching television in Spanish all the time. Do English. And he was always pushing practicing in English. Don't hang out with Spanish speakers. Now, we did a little bit of research on it, and a colleague of mine, former student, Francisco Ramos, and I actually wrote a paper called Arnold's Advantages, where we compared the advantages that Arnold had with the immigrants from Mexico who didn't have those advantages. First of all, my observation, which Francisco verified looking at sources, is that Arnold spoke German all the time. He never hesitated to speak German. His workout partner was Franco Colombo, a chiropractor of all things, who was also Mr. Olympia, Mr. Universe. They had trained together in Europe. They always spoke German together. He never hesitated, etc. Arnold spoke German to his in-laws, Sergeant Shriver, to Maria, etc. He always, whenever someone wanted to speak German with him, he was always very willing. He never avoided it, to his credit. And let me tell you what else he did. And we all knew this because he told us about it. This was Santa Monica, California. As soon as he could, Arnold enrolled in advanced ESL classes at Santa Monica Community College. After ESL classes, he moved on up, took the advanced ones. He took English classes for native speakers. He took business classes. He eventually got a bachelor's degree in correspondence in business from the University of Wisconsin. So he did study and he had access to these classes. The average immigrant, or many immigrants coming from Mexico who were in their 20s, could not so easily get into classes at any college. People say, oh, they should be studying English. Well, they do, they line up and they can never get in because the lines are so long and they can't afford the small admission fee, et cetera, the small tuition. So he had advantages other people didn't. They couldn't go on to advanced classes, et cetera. That was part of it. He had massive exposure to English in classes, comprehensible, and he developed friendships. He spoke English all the time with people he knew, which the average person coming from Mexico doesn't have the opportunity to do that. Arnold had a ready-made circle of friends. At the Mr. Universe contest in London, which he competed in 3 times and won, he made friends with the former Mr. Universe, Reg Park from South Africa. He visited Reg Park and his family in South Africa. They spoke English. He had friends all over the world with whom he communicated in English. When he got to California, he immediately made friends. He had a live-in girlfriend. Now you're not surprised to hear that. And she was an English teacher at the local community college. Arnold immediately, when he came to California, competed in a Mr. Universe contest, the American version, and he came in second, which was quite an upset. The guy who beat him became Arnold's buddy. Bodybuilders are like that. They're always feeling good because of the exercise, so they're very friendly. Frank Zane. Frank Zane was a junior high school math teacher. You can imagine how valuable this friendship was. Frank Zane helped Arnold with his taxes, with his forms, this and that. Arnold claimed that he came as a penniless immigrant with no knowledge of the language. No, he wasn't penniless. He immediately had a job with Weeder Barbell Company, did articles, which someone else might have helped him with, had an income already, was doing quite well, a place to live, sponsored by the Barbell Company. Now, Arnold did very well because he satisfied the requirements of a good bilingual program. My claim, and Francisco and I claimed, Arnold had de facto bilingual education. The big point of my talk is coming right now, and I'll repeat it over and over again. Our hypothesis, this is what has evolved with the group that works on this, that there are 3 pillars of good bilingual programs. You do this and the program works. The students come out with better English than those in all English programs. Number 1, develop literacy in your first language. Arnold was already quite literate in German. He went to high school in Austria and finished high school. He even took a post-high school special course in business, so he was quite well educated in German. You should have subject matter knowledge in your first language. That's the second pillar that makes the world comprehensible. Arnold had graduated high school in Austria and all these things. He was a reader, etc. And you should have comprehensible input in English, which you can get through ESL class, which he showed up and took, and through knowing people and friends. He had all 3. Arnold was not a supporter of bilingual education, but if you look at his case history, he is a walking advertisement for the underlying principles of bilingual education. He had de facto bilingual education. I'll give you another case, which comes from a Zumba teacher Vinnie Henkin, who took a class from me. I never met her. Seemed like an interesting person. It was all done through correspondence. She did great work, though. It was a class that was given through a university in Japan. Sign up for it. And I did lectures and assigned homework and all that. People turned them in. The assignment was to write a couple of short papers, which is how I always operate as a teacher. Her short paper was so good that, of course, we turned it into a regular paper, co-authored it. This is, by the way, my formula for working with students. I've done it very successfully with Nooshan Ashtari, whom you will hear about. I make them do all the correct work and I get the credit. That worked out perfectly in this case. Anyway, she did this case history of a young man who came to the United States around junior high school age. His name was Ramon, from Mexico. Ramon came in knowing very little English, not advanced. What they did is they unfortunately put him in ninth grade, which was appropriate to his age, but not his background in education. And he was having a rough time. The breakthrough came during the first vacation. He discovered graphic novels. He had already been reading graphic novels in Spanish, background in the first language. He picked up Naruto comics, he had read them in Spanish, and started reading them in English. He got them from the school library. He downloaded them from the school's computer. He had a very good supply of Naruto novels. Naruto was a ninja, okay? Good subject matter, I think. He started reading them and he had seen the TV series in Mexico in Spanish. He started reading them in English and he kept reading only Naruto. He got lots and lots of them. Narrow reading, which means it's comprehensible and interesting. After about a year of reading, a year and 4 months, he moved on to young people's literature. He started reading the Percy Jackson novels. I've read a couple of them. They're pretty good. You know, the gods who come down and interact with people and have adventures and all that. What happened in school? What happened in school, after 2 years in the United States, he nearly got enough English to be exited from the program. He did very well in his sheltered classes, etc., learned subject matter, and was doing extremely well. So this also satisfies the 3 requirements. He had comprehensible input in English from these Naruto novels. He had a background in the first language, which made it more comprehensible. And he had literacy in his home language. All those things came together. The winner here, yes, it's bilingual education, but the reason it wins is because these 3 principles are met. So once again, we have de facto bilingual education. Now I'm going to begin my talk all over again and tell you about bilingual education and what the research and theory says about it. I'm going to start at the beginning in my career when we first discovered all this, and it goes back to the idea of comprehensible input. The hypothesis that I've been working with for the last 45 years, 46 years. Do you remember this happens to you? You find some old clothes in the closet and you realize that your new pair of pants is really 10 years old and your old pair of pants is like 20 years old, okay? So this is what happened. This stuff seemed to be new to me, but it's been around for a while. The input hypothesis is the core of this. And this says, we acquire language in one way, you've seen this, you've heard about it, when we understand it. And the way it works is this. You get lots and lots of input that you understand, comprehensible input. The result of this is language competence, grammar, vocabulary, fluency. You can't learn them directly. You can't get them directly. You get comprehensible input, and all this stuff comes as a result. Frank Smith has pointed out in Language and Literacy, we have confused cause and effect. The cause is comprehensible input. The result is language. Now, we generally do this backwards. When I took French in high school, very much like your first foreign language class, no matter where you grew up. Chapter 1 is a list of vocabulary words you're supposed to master and a few simple grammar rules that you're supposed to learn consciously. And you practice all these by output, usually written exercises that you do. And the idea is if you practice this enough, you will master the rules and you will memorize the vocabulary. It turns out that's backwards. What we say is get comprehensible input, hear interesting stories, read interesting stories. The result of that is you will absorb all the grammar and the vocabulary you need. This is how it works. Oh my, and occasionally there'd be an occasional story in these classes and these books, but not very many. I remember my French textbook in high school. It was a story about Monsieur et Madame Dupont and their 4 very strange and boring children, and not very much ever happened in these stories. The point of the story was for you to learn the grammar, was for you to see the vocabulary again and again. So this is what we did then. We have changed it to comprehensible input. The theory then was what we call skill building, practice hard, and you will eventually learn the grammar, but it never happens. I call this a delayed gratification hypothesis. Study hard, eventually, someday you'll be able to use the language. My hypothesis is that it has never happened that way. There's not a single person on this planet who has ever mastered a language or even gotten fairly good at it from grammar alone, from practice alone, from output and correction alone. Not only it doesn't work, but it's not very pleasant. A study was done in Canada, in Montreal. They looked at students, French students who were in English classes, Anglophones who were in French classes, and they gave them questionnaires as to how they liked the class. And the classes in those days, all of them were very, very grammar oriented. The results, 95% of the students in the class hated them. Wow. The 5% who liked them, and this is my hypothesis, probably are the ones who became language teachers, the ones who really like grammar. That was me, by the way. I was one of these exceptional cases. So I have always been a grammar lover, and it's taken me years of meditation and Prozac to kind of get over it. This is not the way it works. Studies, and I won't be going through all of them today. I've been doing this for the last 47 years. The research shows when we compare comprehensible input and grammar, comprehensible input has never lost in any comparison. So over and over again. Well, what about bilingual education? Let's apply that to bilingual ed. The goal of bilingual education, one of the main goals, is academic English. We all agree, thanks to the pioneering work of Jim Cummins, that our goal is not simply conversational English. Our goal is academic English, the English that you find in schools and school situations, so you can learn things through English and have intellectual conversations, technical English, etc. I think there are 2 goals of bilingual education in the United States: academic English and continued development of the heritage language. And Dr. Ashtari will talk about that when she has the podium. So how do we get academic English? First thing we need to do is get academic language in your first language. That is crucial. Learning to read in the primary language, in many cases Spanish, some cases other languages, is a powerful way of doing it. In fact, it is nearly essential. If you do that, the rest is actually fairly easy. How does it happen? Basic literacy instruction. We learn to read by reading. Frank Smith, Kenneth Goodman, I think they're absolutely right. I think the heavy phonics people have gone off in the wrong direction. I think the research supports the Frank Smith, Kenneth Goodman idea very well. You learn to read the same way we acquire language, by getting comprehensible input, by understanding what's in the page. Common sense. It's easier to learn to read in a language you already understand. And that's how we do our first language. It's very hard if we all decided we're going to learn to read in Lithuanian and we have Lithuanian text and none of us speak a word of Lithuanian. It's not going to go very well. It's going to be quite awkward, but it's much easier to learn to read in a language you already know. Once you can read in one language, it transfers easily to another language, not overnight, but it is much, much faster. We have several studies that show that. Of course, the one I like best is one that I'm a co-author of. This was the dissertation of Pauline Dow, who's now an executive in bilingual companies and all that, doing very well. And this was co-authored with Josie Tinajero. Some of you know her quite well, very active in NABE. Anyway, this was, we took advantage of Pauline and helped her write up her study. Here's what she found, and I'll tell you why this is so good. She looked at children in second grade who were Spanish speakers. She looked at the same children later in sixth grade. That was a lagged study, quite unusual. The ones who read in Spanish better in the second grade did a better job in English in the sixth grade. These are the same kids in the second grade and the sixth grade. So this is direct evidence that if you're good in your first language, you're going to do better in your second language. Okay, how should we do that? How should we get kids to do ESL and take advantage of all this? I'm going to distinguish between direct ways of doing it and indirect ways of doing it. And I've got, for what some of you may find, new information that's going to make life a lot easier that I've been trying to take advantage of. I'm basically going to report on the work of our colleague Beniko Mason, who has developed this method and has used it with great success in Japan. This is for English as a foreign language in Japan, and we have got to try this in our foreign language classes and in our ESL classes, and life is going to be a lot easier. The first section, the first part, beginners, we begin with stories. Stories are the foundation of everything. The last 10 years or so, I've been very interested in stories, storytelling, what happens when you listen to stories. Everybody likes stories. Children like their parents to tell them stories. So again, 95% of kids like their parents to tell them stories. The 5% who don't like it, the parents don't like telling stories to them. What we have found, the more stories you hear when you're a child, the better you do in school, the more you know, the faster your language development is. And of course, it is very, very pleasant. I'm going to interrupt this by giving you some additional advice. I'm giving you advice on how to succeed as a teacher in these programs, but I want to do something for your social life and make the same point about how wonderful stories are. Let's say you're invited to a party. You know you're not going to know anybody. It's just one of those things. How do you prepare to make light conversation with total strangers? My suggestion, watch the last 3 movies that are popular. Then you can go up to any small group, say, I just saw Terminator 29. It was fantastic. You'll have a conversation, guaranteed. Someone will have seen that, or the next Avatar movies, which are going to come out next time. I just saw Avatar 2. It's fantastic. Someone will have seen it. They will talk to you about it. And you'll have a good conversation. You've done this. The average person who sees a movie, who likes it, and most people do, can have a good conversation that sounds a lot like a literature class. People are very sophisticated when it comes to critiquing, enjoying stories, talking about them, etc. Stories are everywhere. We need to take advantage of this. So in Beniko's method, story listening is the first kind. She uses stories that, in her words, have stood the test of time. She gets them from the Brothers Grimm, other fairy tales, etc. She prepares the story, picks out the words, expressions that she knows will be a little bit tough, that people may not know, and is prepared to explain them. She's a good artist, so she draws a picture. There were 3 brothers, brother 1, brother 2, brother 3, tall one, a short one, etc. She then explains using body motion like TPR, She also explains by just more explanation in English. Occasionally, she teaches in Japan. She will give the definition in Japan. Nothing wrong with that. The students in these classes have the vocabulary, the tough vocabulary, explained to them in this way. They're not told to learn the vocabulary. They're not told to study the vocabulary. They get enough help so the story is more comprehensible. And now the startling result. You better sit down when I tell you this. This is more efficient for vocabulary acquisition than studying the vocabulary. Benico Mason has compared this to groups that actually do more additional vocabulary exercise. Yeah, they get better in vocabulary, but in terms of words learned per minute, the ones who hear it as part of the story are better. So I finally have the answer to this question. If my students read a story or they hear a story, should I supplement this with vocabulary activities to reinforce the vocabulary? The answer is the time is better spent telling another story. You'll get the words again. The words will come back again and again. You get better vocabulary acquisition. So this is really a very happy result. Well, after hearing all these stories, and you hear 100 of them more, this is basically what class is about, hearing stories. We go on to reading. Benico gives them a transition to it by their earliest stories or the text of the stories they've heard. And then they go to a second stage, which I am particularly fascinated with. She calls it guided self-selected reading. We want self-selected reading. My current hypothesis is that the magic key to literacy is self-selected fiction, stories that you have decided you want to read yourself. Self-selection is the key to making sure the novels you read, the books you read are interesting. Now, I'll give you a nice quote from Garrison Keiler on this. On the Prairie Home Companion, he said this once, I dug it out. He said, as a former English major, I'm a sitting duck for gift books. And in the past few years, I've gotten Dickens, Thackeray, Smollett, Richardson, Emerson, Keats, Boswell, and the Brontes. All of them great, capital G. None of them ever read by me. All of them now on my shelf, looking at me and making me feel guilty. The last thing I ever want as a present is a book. Someone gives you a book, unless you've negotiated it in advance, it's assigned reading. I hate assigned reading. I want to select it myself. I'm always afraid the person who gave me the gift is going to come up to me a few weeks later and say, well, Steve, did you read that book I gave you? And there's this embarrassing moment. Oh, I'll get to it, blah, blah, blah. I'd like to tell them in advance, don't do that. Don't give me books as gifts. I refuse books as gift unless they've been negotiated in advance from everybody I know except one person. There's one person, when he recommends a book, he's always right, never wrong. And it's always the right book that I should be reading now, and I'm always very excited. And that's my son. He knows exactly what I should be reading, when I should be reading it, etc. Takes good care of me. But in general, no. So here's how we do it. The goal of our literacy program, our ESL program, is for students, when they exit the program, to be dedicated voluntary readers, where they select their own material. Benico has invented a stage that leads to this. She calls it guided self-selected reading. And this is what you do after you've done a great deal of story listening. Students start reading easy books that are within their level. The teacher helps them select. Can't be self-selected right away because they don't know what's out there, etc. She helps them find books that are interesting to them, might be different books for different people. She does suggest books. Gradually, loosens the constraints. Eventually, students are on their own. In the French class I took, you might read one graded reader in a year, maybe two. Sit down when I tell you this again. Where Beniko taught at the university in Japan, their library had 5,000 graded readers. Now we're talking. That's what you need. The students read 100, 200, 300 graded readers. All easy, easy, easy. Not in sequence. You get to select the ones you kind of like, etc. We can do this in English because there are all these companies that have them, and the students can't afford them. They're $5, $6, $7 each. Oh my gosh, you can read 100, that's hundreds of dollars. But if we have them in a library, or we have them so they can be downloaded, it's going to work. Well, I've been trying this on myself, and I recommend you do this too. This is your homework, and you will enjoy it. I bet that 98% of you, because I know who you are and I know what you like, I bet you're like me. You're dying to start another language. Isn't it true? Oh my gosh, I hear another language and I want to learn it. I want to read in it. I want to have conversations. It's never ending. That's why we got into language education. So in my solitary time at home, I'm having a good time. One of the many pleasant things I've been doing is I've been reading. I've been reading in Spanish. I've been reading graded readers in Spanish. I found a couple of authors who are terrific. Let me tell you where I am in Spanish. I'm an advanced intermediate. I'm nearly ready for independent reading. I managed to get through a book by Isabella Allende last summer. And it was, oh gosh, it was so good. The fact that it was over my level really wasn't so bad because she pushes you on to the next sentence. You really want to know what's going to happen next. I read Zorro, which is violence. I really liked it. Anyway, I found a couple of authors who have managed to produce graded readers that are literature. That's the best part. One of them is a name you're already familiar with. His name is Bill Van Patten. You know who he is. He's one of the top researchers in the field. Bill Van Patten is also a novelist in English and in Spanish, and I've read his stuff in both. He's one of my two favorite novelists these days. Check his stuff out. You will really like it. It's about people, problems, interaction, things you want. My other favorite author, let me get the name perfectly right. See, I have these notes here and then I put them in a place where I can't find them. Okay, Adriana Ramirez is her name. And she has graded readers and I've been reading them one after the other. Oh my goodness, they're literature. You forget that it's a graded reader. You want to know what's going to happen in the next chapter. I still have a couple more to go and I'm rereading some of them. They're that good. So the people who do graded readers are improving all the time, ready-made for all of us. I've been improving in Spanish because I've been reading every day and I have evidence that I've been improving and evidence for the reading hypothesis. I've been reading Adriana Ramirez when I finished the two I had by Van Patten. And I don't speak Spanish to anybody where I live because I'm home all the time. But I do go out occasionally. I speak Spanish at Subway sandwiches, which is not a long conversation. But every Friday at like 6 in the morning, Ralph's grocery store has a special time for old people. So you won't get the coronavirus, right? And I go in there Friday mornings at 6 in the morning, and there aren't very many people there, which is nice. And I always make sure I get the same guy at checkout. His name is Fidel. He's from Mexico. The first time he was my guy, I spoke to him in Spanish. Of course, he answered in English. This is a normal thing. I then had my sentence all ready, and I said, mi meta es hablar español como ustedes. Tú puedes ayudarme. And my goal is to speak Spanish the way you do. Can you help me? He was so delighted. So every Friday, I get my test from Fidel, who's a super nice guy. he always speaks to me in Spanish, and we joke around, etc. And I've noticed that every week, in general, he speaks a little faster, a little more idiomatic, a little more casual. I'm getting better, and he can hear it. And my theory is that he is responding in reaction to what I say. This is my informal evidence that this works. It's enormously pleasant. Well, this goes on to the next stage after, my plan is to try to read 200 graded readers, 300, etc. So I'm getting them gradually, getting them all the time. And I'm eventually going to get there. And I'm going to go back to Isabel Allende when that happens. I've tried a few, serious literature things. They're still a little too hard. I need another 100 graded readers. But I'm getting better. And that's the point. In school, in our programs, when you reach that point where you can read authentic Spanish written by native speakers for native speakers, you're done. You don't need school anymore. You're on your own. The goal of education is to bring you to the point where you can do these things on your own and you don't need school. And that's what I'm looking for in Spanish. I'm at that point in a couple of other languages. It's quite nice. The others, the ones I do well in my languages are the ones where I've had lots of reading and lots of comprehensible input. The ones where I'm not so good, it's very hard to get comprehensible input. That is the factor, by the way. And this works. I will give you a little bit of the evidence that this works, which I think is quite spectacular. And then we'll talk about another indirect way of doing it. Co-authored a study. Once again, my co-author did the work and I got the credit. This was Beniko Mason. When she was teaching at the university, she retired last year. She taught English, and one of her classes was open to anyone from the community who wanted to do English. The class itself was stories, and the homework was graded readers. Well, she did this for a few years, and at the end of each semester, students would come up to her and say, "This has been great. Can we continue with this? Can you help us select books and talk to us if we have problems?" Just occasional advising, etc. She agreed under the condition that they take alternate forms of the TOEIC test. Those of you who know Asia knows that all of Asia suffers from TOEIC fever. This is an exam that's given in Japan, Taiwan, Korea, everywhere. It's a pretty good test. We use the reading comprehension and listening comprehension parts. It's not bad at all. It'll give you a pretty good idea where you are in English. And TOEIC is everywhere. If you get a certain TOEIC score in high school, you're excused from the English requirement. Employers want to know your TOEIC score, and you need to continue to improve or you lose your job, etc., because English is so important. So we took advantage of this. Dr. Mason said, I'll do this with you, be your consultant, if you agree to take alternate forms of the TOEIC test every so often. She had students who were in age from their 20s to one student in his 70s. I want to party with him. He seems quite interesting. Anyway, and they took alternate forms. Some for a couple of months. The longest one was a year and a half. Here's what we found. We estimated they gave us reading lists of what they read. We estimated how much time they put in reading. Our spectacular result, which I want to put on a bumper sticker and a t-shirt. For every hour of reading for pleasure, these students gained 0.6 points on the TOEIC exam, better than a half a point. Now the TOEIC is from 0 to 1,000. Most people, when they start the reading, are at 250 already. This means you read for an hour a day for a year. Even better if you read 2 hours a day for a year. You can go from 0 to 60. You can go from low levels just about up to the higher levels of academic English. You want to do that? Or you want to study vocabulary from a workbook and do grammar exercises? This is much, much more fun, and it works. We have replicated this again and again. We also have other evidence that shows that vocabulary basically comes from reading. I'm going to do one more study because there's another motive here. This was done in the UK, and it was done through the University of London. These people have been studying the same subjects for over 40 years, since they were babies, and every few years giving them tests. This time they did it, the subjects were 42 years old. They gave them a test in English vocabulary, native speakers. The best predictor, reading, of course, not study, but reading. Fiction was stronger than nonfiction. Isn't that interesting? Fiction was the clear winner. So when I get to be 42, I'm going to start reading. I know what this means anyway. So it was what they found, that what you were reading now when you were 42 is what really counted. Not what you did when you were 6, not what you did when you were 8 or in 3rd grade. It's reading all the time at any age will help. I will add to this the insight and the comments of Steve Kaufman, who is a famous polyglot. I consider Steve Kaufman to be my personal language therapist. He's very good at applying this stuff to research, especially if you're working on languages. Steve knows 20 languages, okay? He's amazing. And I've been with him, where he's been speaking these other languages. We went to lunch with my Chinese teacher and all her friends when we were at ACTFL, and they were just bowled away by his Chinese, his Mandarin. I have heard him speak Spanish in restaurants. He's very good. I gave a lecture that was carried on television in Canada. No, I listened. Did I give the lecture? No, I listened to the lecture. I'm sorry. Get confused at my age. And it was in French about my favorite topic, namely Krashen's theory of language acquisition. And Steve Kaufman was I've done that in French too, that's another story. Steve Kaufman was in the audience, and he asked questions in French, and his French was amazing. It was beautiful, Canadian, educated French. No, so he's the real thing. The 20 languages he knows, he's done 8 of them since age 62. The language acquisition device does not fade away. We have additional evidence for this. The study I did with Dr. Mason on vocabulary, picking up vocabulary by reading, there was very little individual variation among the subjects. Everyone did it about the same. We didn't have gifted people, non-gifted people, older people, younger people. They all were approximately the same. When you get the right input, which we call optimal input, comprehensible, compelling, highly interesting, there's a lot of it, and it's rich in language to support new language acquisition. When you get that, everybody's good at languages, doesn't matter how old you are. We also think, and this helps bilingual ed, that fiction is a wonderful form of knowledge. We're going to give people knowledge by teaching them subject matter in the first language. It's going to make the English they hear much more comprehensible. And we're going to give them sheltered subject matter teaching. Again, English content made comprehensible. I think that's important and helpful. But reading for fun is a wonderful sort of just knowledge of the world. Studies from the University of Michigan. People who read more fiction know more about everything. They know more about history. They know more about literature. They know more about science. They know more about practical matters. They know more about everything. I will close with one case history. I want to tell you about my cousin Evelyn. My cousin Evelyn was, oh gosh, she was so wonderful when I was a little boy. And she was like 12 years older than I was, and really nice. And when she got married, I used to go to her place all the time, hang out with her and her husband, my cousin Marty, who was just super guy. So we were very close. She was also one of my mom's best friends, another good reason to stay in touch with Evelyn. Evelyn's now 93. And she told me about 6 months ago, she said, I've always wanted to know more about the law. Martin was a lawyer. He had a law degree, didn't practice, but he had a law degree. And he knew so much about everything. He got it from going to law school. I want to do that. I want to take a course in legal knowledge. I said, Evelyn, I have another suggestion. You might consider this. Start reading John Grisham novels. When you're done with that, go to Lisa Scatolini, okay? Read these wonderful novels about what goes on in courts, etc. She tried it. She loves it. She said she's learning so much about the law through these beautifully written novels. This is the source of knowledge for most people. People who are not readers don't know very much. And I could go on and talk about Donald Trump, but this isn't the time and place. There, I did it already. Okay, people who don't read know much, much less, etc. So I'm gonna close by saying we can build English directly through ESL. We can do it indirectly through content teaching in the first language, which we do. Even more through reading in general, in first language and second language, where we build up this enormous knowledge of everything in the world. So that is my talk. I'm going to complete by going over the, oh, I didn't tell you about the sample program. Well, you're not going anywhere. Okay, so forgive me, Dr. Ashtari, I'm going to take 60 seconds more. On the handout is a sample program at the end, which integrates the three areas. This is an ideal program, an idealization. Let's say we have this very perfectly set up school, which nobody teaches in, where half the kids, let's say, speak Spanish, the other half speak English. So what do? I think two-way is awkward, frankly. I think this is an easier way of doing it where we can get everything. The students come in, the Spanish dominant students, we immediately mainstream all the kids in art, music, and physical education. Art has pictures, music has some language, PE has movement. A lot of it will be comprehensible. We get the kids together, they get to know each other, have a good time. High quality ESL right away, following a program similar to what I outlined with you with Benico. All core subjects taught in the first language. So math, science, all in the first language right away. You can't do it in the second language, it won't be comprehensible. You can't do it in simplified English because they don't know enough English. Then the intermediate stage. This is where we start teaching subjects in English. We begin with math and science. The first subjects you teach in somewhat simplified English, sheltered English, are the ones that have the most context to help you. So math and science are the early ones. Social studies and language arts stays in the first language because it's harder to make it comprehensible. They're still getting it in first language. So then we go to the advanced stage. The advanced stage, the first group of subjects we mainstream, math and science. Look what's happened to math. You begin with math in the first language, then go to sheltered math, then it's taught in the mainstream. So the child who's had math first in the first language knows his math, knows her math, then has it in sheltered, picks up more of the vocabulary, learns more math. By the time the child gets it in mainstream, it's a pretty good chance of it being comprehensible. Gradually, all subjects move slowly into the mainstream. Sheltered language, ESL becomes sheltered language arts after a while. We get everyone in the mainstream, and we can begin heritage language development, again, which Dr. Ashtari will tell you much, much more about, which I think is the hottest area in bilingual ed, where we can make the most progress, the quickest, and really make life better for everybody now, okay? How long does it take? When people ask me how long it takes, I tell them, I'm gonna give you an answer that is thorough, quantitative, it's an exact number. I know exactly how long it takes. You better write this down. It depends. If the child has a good background in the primary language, they're going to fly through a program like this. You barely see them. If they haven't had a good background in the first language, it can take a while. It can take, a few years, 5 years, 6 years. Who cares? What we're concerned with is ultimate attainment. They're going to be fine in the long run. By the way, we constantly hear that the children have to be at grade level, And we see these frightening statistics where such a percentage of children are not at grade level. You know what grade level means? It means the median. It means the 50th percentile. Half the children, by definition, should be below grade level. It's not a problem. So we have a math crisis. People are always getting this statistic all wrong. These programs will work beautifully if we have things for them to read for pleasure. A strong print environment with lots of books to read, all kinds of books, easily available. We don't even have it in Spanish. Look at Sandra Pucci's work from 10, 15 years ago in Wisconsin, and you'll find that even bilingual schools, dedicated bilingual schools, go to the school library, there's hardly anything to read in Spanish that's really interesting. And I'm going to transition now. This is a beautiful transition, if I say so myself. I'm going to transition now to Dr. Ashtari, whose focus has been on a language where there isn't much out there. And she will tell you what the problems are with Farsi, otherwise known as Persian. Thank you very much for your attention.